The sharp clatter of metal hitting the aircraft floor pierced through the recycled cabin air like a rifle shot. "Get down on your knees, now!" 183 passengers sat paralyzed with terror as an enormous figure, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, his face marked with ancient scars, dressed in black tactical gear, seized the petite flight attendant by her navy uniform collar and threw her violently to the ground. She crashed hard onto the carpet, her knees taking the full force, her beverage tray scattering across the aisle in an explosion of shattering glass and spilling drinks. Yet she made no sound. No scream escaped her lips. No tears formed in her eyes. The massive man, whom his accomplices called Magnus, loomed over her with the self-satisfaction of a predator establishing dominance. His icy gray eyes scanned the cabin, absorbing the ocean of frightened faces before him. Young children gripped their mothers tightly. Business executives who'd been typing emails moments earlier now sat with trembling hands raised in surrender. "Everyone look at her," Magnus commanded, his voice carrying the gravelly weight of someone intimately familiar with violence. "This demonstrates what happens to anyone who fantasizes about playing hero on this aircraft today." The flight attendant, her name tag identified her as Devon Sterling, gradually lifted her head. She appeared unremarkable, perhaps 5'4", with dark hair secured in a regulation bun. 32 years old, according to airline records. Nothing exceptional, nothing intimidating, simply another service worker in a polyester uniform, now kneeling in a puddle of spilled orange juice. But something flickered in her eyes that didn't belong there. For a fraction of a second, so brief Magnus nearly missed it, those gray eyes swept the cabin with mechanical precision, calculating as though taking inventory of something far more critical than passenger comfort. 3 hijackers. Positions: row 3, row 17, cockpit door. Weapons: 2 ceramic blades, 1 firearm, possibly a Glock, possibly replica. Exits: none viable. Altitude: 35,000 feet. The assessment took less than 2 seconds. Then her eyes went blank again, submissive, defeated. "Stand up," Magnus sneered, yanking her to her feet by her arm. "And bring me a drink. That's all women like you are useful for anyway." Devon lowered her gaze submissively. "Yes, sir." In row 12, a man with salt and pepper hair and work-hardened hands paused mid-breath. Jackson Hayes had served 18 years in the United States Air Force, spending his final 6 as a technical sergeant maintaining F-16 engines at Nellis Air Force Base. He'd observed enough military personnel throughout his career to recognize something most civilians would entirely miss. The way she fell. Too controlled. She'd rolled with the impact, distributing force across her body rather than absorbing it through her joints. The way she stood, weight balanced, knees slightly bent, center of gravity low, like a fighter returning to stance, like a pilot bracing for G-forces. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. She was merely a flight attendant, probably took some self-defense class at the local gym. Nothing more. Yet somewhere in the depths of his mind, a small voice whispered, "Something isn't right about this woman." He had absolutely no idea that within the next 20 minutes, that same voice would be screaming, "I warned you!" As the hijacking leader knelt at her feet and a 3-star general would soon stand at attention to salute her. Quick pause before we continue. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because tomorrow's episode, it goes even deeper than this. Flight AA-1147 had departed Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport at 6:45 a.m., bound for Seattle-Tacoma with an anticipated arrival time of 10:30 a.m. Pacific. 183 passengers, 4 flight attendants, 2 pilots. A routine Tuesday morning flight that would never be routine again. The takeover had happened with frightening speed, too fast for anyone to react properly. Magnus had emerged from the first-class lavatory precisely as the seatbelt sign chimed off, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd executed this maneuver before. His partners, Victor and Cole, had synchronized flawlessly, one blocking the rear galley, the other forcing cockpit entry through a ruse involving a passenger feigning a medical emergency. Captain Anderson, a 23-year veteran, had been struck across the temple before reaching the emergency transponder. He now lay unconscious in the cockpit, blood seeping from a gash above his left eye, while First Officer Logan sat zip-tied to his seat, forced to maintain autopilot under Cole's threatening glare. In the main cabin, Magnus had established control with brutal efficiency. The ceramic blades, invisible to metal detectors, had been sufficient to terrify passengers into submission. The gun, whether genuine or counterfeit, had completed the task. But what Magnus didn't know was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. "Listen carefully," Magnus announced, pacing the center aisle like a general inspecting troops. "This aircraft is now under our control. You will remain seated. You will remain silent. You will do exactly as instructed. And in 4 hours, you'll all disembark in Havana alive and well." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Cuba. Political asylum. Ransom, probably. "Anyone who interferes," Magnus continued, pausing beside an elderly woman in row 7, "will be made an example of. Are we clear?" 183 heads nodded in terrified unison, all except one. In row 3 of first class, Senator Richard Dalton of Montana processed the situation with the cold calculation of a career politician. At 64 years old, he'd survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 congressional investigations, and a particularly brutal divorce. He wasn't a man who frightened easily. "Now listen here," he said, rising to his feet despite the ceramic blade Victor pressed against a nearby passenger's throat. "I am a United States Senator. Whatever you want, I can—" Magnus's fist connected with the senator's jaw before he could finish the sentence. Dalton crumpled back into his leather seat, stars exploding behind his eyes. "Anyone else want to introduce themselves?" Magnus asked pleasantly. Silence. "Excellent!" He turned to Devon, who still stood in the aisle, her uniform now stained with orange juice and the faint pink of scraped knees. "You? Coffee? Black. Make it quick." Devon nodded, head bowed, and moved toward the galley with the shuffling gait of someone thoroughly broken. She passed row 8, where a pregnant woman named Grace Bennett sat clutching her swollen belly, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. 7 months pregnant, due in October, supposed to be visiting her mother in Seattle for the baby shower. Without breaking stride, Devon's hand brushed Grace's shoulder, a gesture so subtle nobody noticed. But Grace felt it, a squeeze, brief but firm, a message transmitted through touch alone. "I see you. Hold on." In the galley, Devon's hands moved with automatic precision, brewing coffee she would never allow Magnus to drink in peace. Her fingers found the emergency equipment locker, fire extinguisher, first aid kit, defibrillator, 2 plastic utensil drawers, nothing useful as a weapon, not yet. She opened the overhead compartment where crew bags were stored and retrieved her own, a small black duffel with the airline logo. Inside, beneath her change of clothes and makeup kit, lay a dog-eared paperback, Chess Strategy for Beginners. The margins were filled with handwritten notes that had nothing to do with chess, egress points, timing calculations, equations that resembled mission planning more than game theory. She closed the bag and returned to her task. What she didn't know was that someone was watching her very carefully. Meanwhile, Victor conducted a sweep of passenger belongings. He was the technical expert of the trio, a former demolition specialist from a Baltic state whose name appeared on no fewer than 7 international watch lists under various aliases. His job, ensure no one had smuggled anything useful aboard. "Phones!" he barked, moving down the aisle with a garbage bag. "All of them! Now! One by one, passengers surrendered their lifelines to the outside world. iPhones and Androids tumbled into the plastic bag like digital tombstones. Victor paused at row 15, where a young man in a wrinkled suit was hesitating. "Problem?" Victor asked. I'm a journalist," Brandon Pierce stammered. "I need my phone for—" The ceramic blade pressed against his throat, just hard enough to draw a thin line of fear without breaking skin. "For what?" Brandon's phone joined the others. Victor continued his sweep, eventually reaching the crew area where Devon was preparing Magnus's coffee. His eyes swept over her with the clinical assessment of someone cataloging potential threats. Small female service worker. No visible muscle definition, no defensive posture, irrelevant. But something made him pause. Her hands, the way they moved, too steady. Most people's hands trembled after being thrown to the ground and threatened with violence. Adrenaline did that, made fine motor control nearly impossible. This woman's hands were rock solid. "What's your name?" he asked. "Devon Sterling, sir." "How long have you been a flight attendant?" 4 years, sir." Victor studied her face, searching for telltale signs of deception. Dilated pupils, rapid blinking, micro-expressions of fear masked by false calm. He found none. "Where did you work before this?" "Customer service. Call center in Phoenix." A call center, of course. That explained the flat affect, the ability to absorb abuse without reacting. Years of angry customers screaming about billing errors had probably beaten all the fight out of her. "Finish the coffee," Victor ordered. "Then get back to serving passengers. Keep them calm. Make them think everything will be fine." "Yes, sir." He left, satisfied that the small woman in the stained uniform posed no threat whatsoever. He had no way of knowing that the last person who underestimated her was buried in an unmarked grave outside Kandahar, with a confirmed kill shot from 800 meters that had been attributed to unknown Allied forces in the official report. The next 20 minutes settled into a tense routine. Magnus remained in the galley, drinking coffee and monitoring communications via the aircraft satellite phone. Victor patrolled the cabin like a shark circling prey. Cole stayed in the cockpit, keeping First Officer Logan under constant surveillance while occasionally checking on the still unconscious Captain Anderson. And Devon served drinks. She moved through the cabin with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd performed this task thousands of times, which she had. 4 years of pushing beverage carts, smiling at rude passengers, pretending that her master's degree in aeronautical engineering from MIT and her 2,000 flight hours in F-16 fighting Falcons had never existed. It was, she reflected, the perfect cover. No one looked twice at flight attendants. They were part of the scenery, like safety cards in seatback pockets or tiny packages of peanuts nobody actually wanted. Invisible, forgettable, exactly as she intended. In row 12, Jackson Hayes watched her pass with increasing fascination. There it was again, that strange feeling that something was off. The way she walked, heel-toe, weight perfectly centered. Not the mincing steps of someone in airline-mandated low heels, but the confident stride of someone accustomed to maintaining balance in unstable environments. Like a fighter jet pulling 7 GS in a combat turn. He caught himself staring and looked away. "You're being ridiculous," he told himself. She's a flight attendant, not a pilot. But when Devon passed his row again, he noticed something else. The watch on her left wrist, a black G-Shock, scuffed and scratched in patterns suggesting years of hard use. Not the kind of accessory a customer service worker from Phoenix would typically own. The kind of watch military aviators wore. Something wasn't adding up. In row 8, Grace Bennett struggled to control her breathing. The baby was kicking hard, insistent kicks that felt like Morse code from the womb. "I'm scared too, Mom. Get us out of here." Devon appeared beside her, offering a plastic cup of water. "Here," she said softly. "Drink slowly." Grace's hands trembled as she accepted the cup. "Thank you, I don't know what to do." "Breathe," Devon replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Focus on the breathing, nothing else." The instruction was specific, practiced, the kind of thing a flight attendant might learn in basic training, or the kind of thing a combat pilot might be taught to manage stress during high-G maneuvers. "How do you stay so calm?" Grace asked, genuinely bewildered. Devon's gray eyes met hers. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in their depths. Not fear, not submission, something harder, something forged in fires Grace couldn't imagine. "Practice," Devon said and moved on. In first class, Senator Dalton was recovering from Magnus's punch, his jaw throbbing with each heartbeat. The indignity burned almost as much as the physical pain. He was Richard Dalton, for crying out loud, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, a man who dined with presidents and dictated military budgets worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And he'd just been knocked unconscious by some Eastern European thug while a flight attendant watched with empty eyes. Speaking of which, he watched as Devon approached his seat with a glass of ice and a napkin. "For the swelling, sir," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. He snatched the ice from her hand. "This is your fault, you know, if you people had proper security." "Yes, sir." "Don't yes, sir, me. I want your name and employee number. When this is over, I'm having your entire crew fired, especially that worthless captain who let these animals take over his aircraft. The captain is injured, sir." "I don't care if he's deceased. This is a disgrace to American aviation, and someone is going to pay." Devon said nothing. Her face remained impassive, her posture submissive. But Jackson Hayes, watching from row 12, noticed something the senator missed entirely. Her hands had curled into fists at her sides, knuckles going white with pressure. And there was something in her jaw, a slight tension, a clench suggesting she was biting back words that would have made the senator's ears bleed. Then it passed. Her hands relaxed, her jaw unclenched. She moved on to the next passenger as if nothing had happened. Interesting, Jackson thought, very interesting. He was about to witness something that would change everything he thought he knew. The satellite phone in the galley crackled to life. Magnus answered with a curt acknowledgement. Yes, we have control. No complications. 183 passengers plus crew." He listened for a long moment, then smiled, a cold, reptilian expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Understood. 50 million in cryptocurrency routed through the accounts we specified and safe passage to Havana for myself and my associates. You have 3 hours. He hung up and turned to Victor, who'd been listening from the galley entrance. "Negotiations are underway. FBI as expected. Any problems? They want proof of life, a video of the passengers showing everyone is unharmed." Victor nodded. "I'll handle it. Use the girl." Magnus gestured toward Devon, who was refilling the coffee maker. "She reads well on camera, submissive, scared, exactly what they need to see." "Understood." Devon's hands never stopped moving as she listened to their conversation. 50 million, 3 hours, Havana. The FBI would stall, of course. They always did. They'd negotiate, delay, run psychological profiles, try to wear down the hijackers through exhaustion and uncertainty. But these three weren't amateurs. Their coordination suggested professional training. Their demands were specific and achievable. Their willingness to use violence had already been demonstrated. They wouldn't be talked down, which meant that sometime in the next 3 hours, someone on this aircraft would have to act. Devon dried her hands on a towel and considered her options. 3 hostiles, armed with blades and at least 1 firearm. 183 civilians, most of whom would panic at the first sign of violence. 1 injured pilot, 1 restrained co-pilot, 3 other flight attendants trained to pour coffee, not conduct close-quarters combat. Not great odds, but she'd faced worse. Victor approached her with a smartphone, one of the devices he'd confiscated earlier. We're recording a message for the authorities. You will read exactly what I tell you." "Yes, sir." He positioned her in front of the galley curtain, angling the phone to capture her face and the rows of terrified passengers behind her. "Say this. This is Devon Sterling, flight attendant on United Flight 1147. The aircraft has been taken by 3 armed men. All passengers are currently unharmed, but they will be executed one by one if our demands are not met. For the safety of everyone on board, please comply immediately." Devon looked into the camera. Her face was pale, her eyes downcast, the picture of traumatized compliance. "This is Devon Sterling," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Flight attendant on United Flight 1147. The aircraft has been taken by 3 armed men." She paused as if gathering courage, then continued. "All passengers are currently unharmed, but they will be. A tear rolled down her cheek, the perfect touch. "They will be executed one by one if our demands are not met. For the safety of everyone on board, please comply immediately." Victor stopped recording, satisfied. "Good, very convincing." He moved away to transmit the video, leaving Devon alone in the galley. The tear had been real, but not for the reasons Victor assumed. It was a tear of frustration, of rage carefully bottled and suppressed. Because in her 4 years of hiding, of pretending to be someone she wasn't, this was the moment she dreaded most. The moment when violence erupted around her, and she was forced to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting innocent lives. She thought of Tyler, the 8-year-old boy in row 6 currently clutching a stuffed dinosaur and trying very hard not to cry. She thought of Grace, 7 months pregnant, whose baby would never see the world if this flight ended in disaster. She thought of Iris Wells, the senior flight attendant who'd taken Devon under her wing 4 years ago, never suspecting her protege could disassemble and reassemble an M4 carbine blindfolded in under 30 seconds. And she thought of the promise she'd made to herself when she left the Air Force. No more violence. No more killing. Whatever it takes, I will live a normal life. But some promises, she realized, were made to be broken. In the main cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from raw terror to simmering dread. The passengers had internalized their situation, accepted, at least temporarily, that they were at the mercy of these 3 men. Some prayed silently. Others stared out windows at clouds that suddenly seemed very far away. A few enterprising souls quietly calculated survival odds based on hijacking statistics they half remembered from cable news documentaries. Cole emerged from the cockpit, his face flushed with excitement. He was the youngest of the 3 hijackers, Mid-20s, volatile, with the restless energy of someone who enjoyed violence for its own sake. Unlike Magnus's cold professionalism or Victor's calculated precision, Cole operated on pure instinct and aggression. "Autopilot is holding," he reported to Magnus. "The co-pilot is cooperating. The captain is still unconscious." "Good. Any problems with the passengers?" Cole's eyes swept the cabin, searching for targets. They settled on Tyler, the 8-year-old who'd stopped crying but was now hiccuping with barely suppressed sobs. "That one's annoying me," Cole said, pointing at the boy. The child's mother, a thin woman with fear-glazed eyes, wrapped her arms around Tyler protectively. "Please, he's just scared. He'll be quiet, I promise." Cole moved toward them with the predatory grace of a cat approaching a cornered mouse. "I don't like promises, I like results. Leave him alone." The voice came from behind Cole, soft but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Everyone in the cabin held their breath. He turned to find Devon standing in the aisle, blocking his path. She was still small, still wearing the stained uniform, still projecting the body language of a terrified service worker, but something in her eyes had changed. "What did you say to me?" Cole asked, genuinely amused. "I said leave him alone. He's a child. He can't control his fear." "And you think you can tell me what to do?" "No, sir." She lowered her gaze again, the defiance vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He's only a little boy. If you want someone to yell at me." Cole studied her for a long moment, trying to decide if this was bravery or stupidity. In his experience, the line between the two was often non-existent. "You've got some nerve, I'll give you that." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "Most people don't talk back to me." "You know what happens to people who talk back to me?" Devon said nothing. "They get hurt." Still nothing. Cole's hand shot out and grabbed her collar, pulling her face close to his. She could smell his breath, stale coffee, and something chemical that might have been amphetamines. His eyes were dilated, his movements jerky. He was high on something which made him more unpredictable than his partners. "I could hurt you right now," he whispered. "I could hurt you so badly you'd beg me to stop. And no one on this plane would do a thing to help you. You know why?" Devon's voice was steady. "Because they're afraid. Because they know their place." He released her with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. "Now get back to work, and if I hear another word out of you, I'll make sure you're the first one off this plane. Understand?" "Yes, sir." He moved away, still hungry for a target, but temporarily satisfied by the display of dominance. Behind him, the passengers let out a collective breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. In row 12, Jackson Hayes's hands were shaking, not with fear but with recognition. He'd seen what just happened. The way Devon had drawn Cole's attention away from the child. The way she'd absorbed his aggression, redirected it, neutralized it. That wasn't the instinct of a flight attendant protecting a passenger. That was tactical sacrifice. A soldier's move. The turbulence hit without warning, a pocket of rough air that shook the aircraft like a terrier with a toy. Passengers screamed. Overhead bins rattled. Victor stumbled against a seatback, dropping his ceramic blade. But Devon didn't move. While everyone else was thrown off balance, she remained standing in the aisle, knees slightly bent, her body absorbing the motion with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent thousands of hours in unstable flight conditions. The same way a pilot would brace in a fighter jet during combat maneuvers. The same way Jackson himself had learned to stand during his years on aircraft carriers. Their eyes met across the cabin, the former Air Force sergeant and the mystery in a flight attendant's uniform. And in that moment, Jackson saw something that made his blood run cold. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't even concerned. If anything, she looked calculating, patient, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "What the hell are you?" he thought. He was about to find out. The turbulence passed and the normal rhythm of the hijacking resumed. Magnus barked orders, Victor patrolled. Cole sulked near the cockpit door, and Devon continued serving drinks as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something had shifted. Because in the back of the cabin, where the other flight attendants had huddled together for safety, one woman had been watching Devon with growing suspicion. Iris Wells, 52 years old, 28 years with United Airlines, had trained hundreds of new flight attendants over her career. She knew every type: the nervous beginners, the confident pros, the ones who treated the job as a stepping stone to something else. She'd seen cowards and heroes, breakdowns and triumphs. She had never seen anyone like Devon Sterling. In the 4 years they'd worked together, Iris had always sensed something different about the quiet young woman. The way she moved with such precision, the way she never lost her temper even with the rudest passengers, the way she sometimes stared out the window during flights, not at the clouds but at the horizon, the way pilots did. "Devon," Iris whispered when the younger woman returned to the galley. "Iris, we need to do something. We can't just let them." "Not yet." Devon's voice was barely audible, her lips barely moving. "The timing has to be right." "What do you mean, timing? We're being hijacked." "There is no good timing." Devon's gray eyes met Iris's brown ones, and for a moment, just a moment, the mask slipped. "Trust me," she said, and there was something in her voice that made Iris's spine straighten involuntarily, something that commanded respect even when whispered. "I have a plan." Then the mask returned, and Devon was once again the submissive flight attendant, head bowed, shoulders hunched. But Iris had seen enough. She didn't know what Devon's secret was, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. These hijackers had made a very, very bad decision when they chose this flight. The next confrontation came faster than anyone expected. Dr. Marcus Reed, a trauma surgeon from Seattle General, had been monitoring Captain Anderson's condition through the cockpit door whenever Cole allowed. The captain's breathing was growing irregular, his skin pallid, classic signs of a developing subdural hematoma. "He needs medical attention," Dr. Reed said, approaching Magnus in the galley. "If he has a brain bleed, he could die within the hour." Magnus didn't look up from the satellite phone. "Not my problem." "It should be. If he dies, you'll be facing murder charges on top of hijacking. The FBI negotiates differently when dead bodies are involved." That got Magnus's attention. He turned to face the doctor, sizing him up. 60-something, wire-frame glasses, the soft hands of someone who'd never done manual labor. Confident, though, the kind of confidence that came from being the smartest person in the room for 40 years. "What do you need?" "Access to the cockpit. 5 minutes to assess him. If necessary, emergency intervention to relieve intracranial pressure. You want to perform brain surgery at 35,000 feet. I want to prevent a death that will make your situation significantly worse." Magnus considered this. He was no fool. The doctor had a point. A dead hostage changed the calculus entirely. 5 minutes, Victor will supervise." Dr. Reed nodded and moved toward the cockpit, but stopped when he reached Devon. "You," he said, "what's your first aid training?" Basic CPR and emergency response, sir. Good enough, come with me. I may need an extra pair of hands. What happened next would begin to reveal Devon's true identity. They entered the cockpit together, Victor trailing behind with his blade drawn. The space was cramped, barely enough room for 4 people among the instrumentation, and the unconscious captain slumped in his seat. First Officer Logan sat rigid at the controls, his wrists raw from the zip ties binding him. Dr. Reed began his examination, checking pupils, pulse, respiratory rate. Devon stood beside him, handing him supplies from the onboard medical kit with the kind of instinctive efficiency that shouldn't have been possible for someone with basic training. Pen light. She handed it to him, gauze already in her other hand. I need to check his reflexes. Hold the light here. She positioned the beam exactly where he needed it, at exactly the right angle without being asked. Dr. Reed glanced at her, a question forming behind his eyes. You have medical training. Just first aid, sir. That's not first aid positioning, that's surgical assistance. Devon said nothing. The doctor returned to his examination, but the question lingered. In the corner, Victor watched with growing unease. There was something about this woman that didn't add up. The way she'd handled the equipment, the way she hadn't flinched when she saw the captain's condition. Even medical students got queasy around head trauma. This woman hadn't blinked. He's stable for now, Dr. Reed announced. Possible concussion, but I don't think there's a bleed. He needs a hospital, though, soon. Then let's hope the FBI moves fast, Victor said. Back to the cabin. They filed out Devon last, but as she passed through the cockpit door, her eyes swept the instrument panel one final time. Altitude 34,000 feet, heading 270, airspeed 412 knots, fuel 3 hours remaining, autopilot engaged, all the information she would need when she needed it. And that moment was approaching faster than anyone realized. An hour had passed since the takeover. An hour of tension, of whispered prayers, of children trying not to cry and adults trying not to scream. The FBI negotiation was ongoing, a slow dance of offers and counter-offers that both sides knew would lead nowhere. In the galley, Magnus was growing impatient. They're stalling, he said to Victor. Standard procedure. They think they can wait us out. So we escalate. Exactly. Magnus's eyes swept the cabin, looking for the right target. His gaze settled on row 8, on Grace Bennett, 7 months pregnant, her hands resting protectively over her belly. Her. Victor followed his gaze and nodded. The pregnant one, high emotional value. They'll move faster. Get her. Cole, who'd been lurking near the cockpit door, moved toward row 8 with undisguised enthusiasm. This was what he lived for, the fear, the power, the knowledge that he could end someone's entire world with a single decision. You, he said, grabbing Grace's arm. Come with me. No. Grace's scream was primal, the sound of a mother defending her child. Please, no, I'm pregnant. That's the point. He yanked her to her feet, ignoring her struggles, dragging her toward the front of the cabin. The other passengers watched in helpless horror, some covering their eyes, others frozen in their seats, all except one. Devon Sterling stepped into the aisle directly in Cole's path. Stop! The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Cole halted, more surprised than threatened. What? She's pregnant. If you stress her too much, she could miscarry. A dead baby won't help your negotiation. Get out of my way. Take me instead. The offer hung in the air, unexpected and inexplicable. Cole looked at Magnus, who'd moved to the galley entrance to watch. She's got a point, Magnus said. The pregnant woman is more valuable alive and healthy. Use the flight attendant. Cole shoved Grace back into her seat and grabbed Devon instead. Fine, you want to be the hero. Let's see how brave you are when... He never finished the sentence. Because at that moment, Devon's foot hooked behind Cole's ankle. Her body twisted with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. And Cole found himself falling backward, arms pinwheeling, the world suddenly inverted. He hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Devon stepped back, her hands raised, her expression one of surprised apology. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He startled me and I took a self-defense class last year and oh my gosh, are you okay? The transformation was so complete, so convincing that even Victor, who'd witnessed the entire sequence, found himself doubting what he'd seen. It looked like an accident. A clumsy collision between a frightened woman and an unbalanced man, but Magnus wasn't fooled. His eyes narrowed as Cole scrambled to his feet, face red with humiliation and rage. There was something wrong here, something that didn't fit the profile of a terrified flight attendant. Cole, Magnus said quietly, stand down. She tripped me, the witch tripped me on purpose. I said stand down. Cole's fury was barely contained, but he obeyed for now. Retreated to the back of the cabin, shooting murderous glances at Devon with every step. Magnus approached her slowly, studying her the way a collector might study a potentially valuable antique. That was quite a fall he took. I didn't mean to. Save it. His voice was soft, almost conversational. I've seen enough combat to know the difference between an accident and a technique. That was a leg sweep, a good one. Devon's face went pale. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in her eyes. But Magnus only smiled. Relax, he said. I'm not going to hurt you, not yet, but I am curious. He leaned closer, close enough that she could smell gun oil and sweat. Who are you really, Devon Sterling? I told you I'm a flight attendant. Before that, customer service. And before that, silence. Magnus nodded slowly as if confirming a suspicion. I thought so. There's more to you than you're letting on. He straightened, adjusting his jacket. But it doesn't matter. Whatever you were, whatever you think you can do, there are 3 of us and 1 of you. And if you try anything like that again, I'll put a bullet in the pregnant woman's belly. The threat landed like a physical blow. Devon's face went even paler. Do we understand each other? Yes, sir. Good, now get back to work. He walked away, leaving her standing in the aisle with trembling hands and a racing heart. But the trembling wasn't from fear. It was from the effort of not breaking his neck where he stood. In row 12, Jackson Hayes had witnessed the entire exchange with growing certainty. That wasn't just a self-defense class move. That was military combatives, specifically the kind taught to combat pilots and special operations personnel. He'd seen it 100 times at Nellie's during joint training exercises. This woman was not who she claimed to be. But who was she? A police officer? FBI. Some kind of air marshal they hadn't disclosed to the passengers. Or something else entirely. He thought about approaching her, asking directly, but something in her eyes, that cold, calculating look, told him she was playing a longer game than he could understand. Whatever she was planning, it wasn't his place to interfere. Not yet. So he sat back, watched, and waited for the moment when all the pieces would fall into place. That moment was coming sooner than he thought. The second hour brought escalation. Magnus, having failed to intimidate Devon into submission, had shifted tactics. He was now focused entirely on the negotiation, demanding real-time updates from the FBI. Victor maintained cabin control. Cole had been relegated to cockpit duty, where his volatile temper was less likely to cause problems. But the passengers were growing restless. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by the kind of simmering resentment that built up when human beings were treated like cattle. Whispered conversations rippled through the cabin. Eyes darted toward potential weapons, heavy laptops, metal belt buckles, the fire extinguisher in the galley. Senator Dalton was the first to voice what many were thinking. "We can't just sit here," he hissed to the businessman beside him, a venture capitalist named Marcus who'd spent the past hour calculating the statistical probability of survival based on historical hijacking data. "They have weapons, Senator. They have blades and one gun. I served in Vietnam. I know what a gun can do, and I know what 100 determined people can do. With respect, sir, 100 people charging 3 armed men in a confined space is a recipe for mass casualties." Dalton's jaw tightened. "Then we need a better plan." Across the aisle, Devon was collecting empty cups and napkins, moving through the cabin with mechanical efficiency. But her ears were attuned to every conversation, every whispered plan, every calculation of risk and reward. The senator was right about one thing: passive resistance wouldn't end this. The FBI could negotiate for days, and Magnus was clearly prepared to wait, or to start making examples of passengers if the wait grew too long. Something had to change, someone had to act, and that someone was about to reveal herself. She passed by the emergency exit row, where a young man in an Army Ranger T-shirt sat with his fists clenched. Garrett, according to his boarding pass. 28 years old, muscular, with the coiled tension of someone who'd been trained to fight and was being forced to do nothing. Their eyes met briefly. She saw the question in his gaze. "Are you with me?" She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Not yet. He understood. He nodded and relaxed his fists for now. At the front of the cabin, Victor was conducting another weapons check. He'd noticed something during his earlier confrontation with Devon, a possibility that nagged at him like a splinter under his skin. "The flight attendant," he said to Magnus. "The one who tripped Cole, what about her? Something's not right, the way she moves, the way she reacted when I searched her bag. There's something we're missing." Magnus considered this. Victor's instincts had saved their lives more than once during operations in Chechnya and Syria. If he sensed a threat, it was worth investigating. "Search her again, thoroughly." Victor moved through the cabin toward the galley where Devon was restocking the beverage cart. She saw him coming and stiffened, almost imperceptibly, a reaction that would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. "Hands against the wall," Victor ordered. "Spread your legs." The passengers watched in uncomfortable silence as Victor conducted a thorough pat-down. His hands moved professionally, checking for concealed weapons or communications devices. He found nothing. But he did notice something. "What's this?" His fingers had brushed against her left shoulder, where the fabric of her uniform covered what felt like raised tissue underneath. "An old injury," Devon said quickly. "Burn scar from a kitchen accident." Victor studied her face. She was good, very good at lying, but not quite good enough. "Take off your jacket." I'd rather not." "That wasn't a request." The cabin had gone silent. 183 pairs of eyes were fixed on the confrontation, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Devon's hands moved to the buttons of her uniform jacket. Slowly, deliberately, one button at a time, but before she could remove it, all hell broke loose. A commotion erupted in the back of the cabin. Garrett, the Army Ranger veteran, had decided he was done waiting. "Now," he shouted, launching himself at Cole, who just emerged from the cockpit. "Take them down." The effect was immediate and chaotic. Half a dozen passengers, men who'd been quietly coordinating in whispered conversations, rose from their seats and rushed the nearest hijacker. Victor spun away from Devon, blade flashing. Screams filled the cabin as the two forces collided. For a moment, it seemed like the passengers might actually win. Garrett had Cole pinned against the cockpit door. Two businessmen were grappling with Victor, trying to wrestle away his blade. A retired Marine had thrown himself at Magnus, who was reaching for his gun. But the hijackers had been in this situation before. They'd trained for exactly this kind of uprising. Victor's blade found flesh. One of the businessmen screamed and fell back, clutching his arm. Magnus's gun cleared its holster and fired a single shot into the ceiling, a deafening thunderclap that froze everyone in place. Enough! The rebellion collapsed as quickly as it had begun. Garrett was thrown off Cole and kicked repeatedly in the ribs. The injured businessman was dragged to the front of the cabin as an example. The retired Marine lay face down in the aisle, Victor's boot on his neck. And Devon stood in the galley, watching with an expression no one could read. "That," Magnus said, breathing hard but smiling, "was very stupid." He grabbed Garrett by the hair and yanked his head up. "You thought you could be a hero? You thought you could save everyone?" Garrett spat at him, a defiant gesture that earned him a punch to the face. "Here's what's going to happen now," Magnus announced to the cabin. "Because of your little rebellion, we're going to have some consequences, starting with this one." He pressed the gun against Garrett's temple. The passengers held their breath. Children buried their faces against their parents. Adults prayed to gods they weren't sure they believed in. "Wait!" The voice came from the galley, soft but carrying. Everyone turned to look at Devon Sterling, who had stepped forward into the aisle. "Wait," she repeated. "He was just trying to protect people. He doesn't deserve to die for that." Magnus laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "And who exactly are you to tell me what anyone deserves?" "Nobody," she said. "I'm nobody, just a flight attendant." She paused, seeming to gather courage. "But if you need to hurt someone to make a point, hurt me instead." The offer hung in the air for the second time in an hour. Cole, his nose bleeding from the fight, stepped forward with eager interest. "Let me, I owe her one." But Magnus held up a hand, studying Devon with renewed curiosity. "You keep offering yourself up. Why? Because he has people waiting for him." She nodded at Garrett. "A family, maybe, friends, a life. I don't have anyone. If someone has to be hurt, it should be the person with the least to lose." Jackson Hayes felt his heart clench. It was a noble lie, the kind soldiers told when they threw themselves on grenades to save their squad mates. The kind of lie that revealed more truth than any confession ever could. Magnus seemed to reach the same conclusion. His eyes narrowed, and he released Garrett with a shove. "Fine," he said. "Cole, take her to the galley. Make sure she remembers this moment." What Magnus didn't know was that this was the moment everything would change. Cole grinned and grabbed Devon's arm, dragging her toward the front of the cabin. The passengers watched in helpless horror, some crying, others looking away. But Iris Wells noticed something no one else did. As Cole pulled Devon past her, the younger woman's free hand brushed against her thigh, and something small transferred from Devon's pocket to Iris's palm. A note, folded into a tiny square. Iris waited until Cole and Devon had disappeared behind the galley curtain before unfolding it with trembling fingers. 4 words written in neat, precise handwriting. When I move, duck. The galley curtain fell closed, obscuring whatever was about to happen from the passengers' view. They could hear Cole's voice, cruel and anticipatory, the sound of something hitting metal. But they couldn't see Devon Sterling's eyes, because if they had, they would have known that everything was about to change. In the dim light of the galley, surrounded by beverage carts and emergency equipment, Cole stood before his prey with the satisfaction of a cat cornering a mouse. "So," he said, cracking his knuckles. "You like playing hero. Let's see how brave you are now." Devon stood with her back against the counter, her posture still submissive, her eyes still downcast. "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Shut up." He stepped closer. "You know what your problem is? You don't know your place. Women like you think you're equal, think you can stand up to men, think you matter." He grabbed her collar, pulling her face close to his. "You don't," he whispered. "You're nothing, you're less than nothing. And I'm going to prove it." For a moment, everything was still. Then Cole made his mistake. He let go of her collar and drew back his hand to strike. And in that fraction of a second, that tiny window when his guard was down and his attention was focused on the coming violence, Devon moved, not like a flight attendant, not like a customer service worker from Phoenix, like a predator. Her hand shot up and caught his wrist, twisting it at an angle that shouldn't have been possible. Cole's body followed, rotating involuntarily to relieve the pressure on his joint. Before he could scream, her other hand was on the back of his head, driving his face into the metal counter with enough force to ring like a bell. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. Time elapsed, 1.2 seconds. Devon stood over him, breathing steadily, her gray eyes cold and assessing. The mask was gone now, stripped away like a disguise that was no longer necessary. In its place was something older, harder, forged in fires that had nothing to do with customer service or first aid training. She moved quickly, searching Cole's pockets, a ceramic blade which she kept, a radio which she disabled, zip ties which she used to secure his wrists and ankles. Then she heard the galley curtain rustle. Victor. He stood at the entrance, blade in hand, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock as he took in the scene. Cole unconscious on the floor, Devon standing over him with a stolen blade in her hand. "What the—" She threw the beverage tray before he could finish. It caught him across the face, staggering him long enough for her to close the distance. His blade slashed wildly. She deflected it with her forearm, accepting a shallow cut in exchange for position. Then her knee found his solar plexus. Her elbow found his temple, and he joined Cole on the galley floor. Time elapsed, 3.7 seconds, 2 down, 1 to go, but Magnus had heard the commotion. He appeared at the galley entrance, gun drawn just as Devon turned to face him. They stood there for a moment, predator and predator, each assessing the other. "Well," Magnus said softly, "I knew there was something about you." Devon said nothing. "Who are you really? Military? Police?" "No, some kind of air marshal. Does it matter?" "Not particularly." He raised the gun. "You're still going to die." "Maybe." She tilted her head slightly. "But not today." Magnus squeezed the trigger, or tried to. But his hand wouldn't cooperate. His fingers had gone numb. His arm was dropping to his side, and the world was tilting sideways in a way that made no sense. He looked down and saw the needle protruding from his neck, the small syringe that had been concealed in Devon's palm, injected during that momentary standoff when all attention was focused on the gun. "Sedative," she said calmly. "From the emergency medical kit, fast acting. You'll be unconscious in about 3 seconds." Magnus's mouth opened to respond, but only a gurgle emerged. 2 seconds. His knees buckled. 1, he hit the floor, and just like that, it was over. Devon stood in the galley, surrounded by 3 unconscious hijackers, her uniform torn and bloodied from Victor's blade. The cut on her forearm was bleeding steadily, but she barely noticed. She had work to do. The galley curtain flew open. Iris Wells stood there, eyes wide with shock and something that might have been vindication. "Oh my gosh," she breathed. "I knew it. I knew there was something. Iris." Devon's voice was calm, commanding. "I need you to listen very carefully. Go to the passengers. Tell them everything is under control. Tell them to remain seated and calm. Can you do that?" Iris nodded automatically, responding to the authority in Devon's voice without questioning it. "What about you?" Devon was already moving toward the cockpit door. "I need to fly this plane." The cockpit door opened to reveal First Officer Logan, still zip-tied to his seat, staring at her with an expression of total disbelief. What just happened?" "Change of management." Devon pulled the ceramic blade from her pocket and cut his restraints. "How's the captain?" "Still unconscious, but stable, I think." Logan rubbed his wrists, wincing. "Who the hell are you?" Devon didn't answer. She was already sliding into the captain's seat, her hands moving across the instrument panel with the familiarity of long practice. Altitude, 33,000 feet. Heading, 285. Fuel, 2 hours, 15 minutes remaining. Seattle, Tacoma, 1 hour, 20 minutes away. She reached for the radio. "Seattle, Tacoma Control, this is United Flight 1147 requesting priority landing. We have a medical emergency and a security situation that has been resolved. Requesting emergency services on standby." The radio crackled. "United 1147, confirm your situation. We show you as a hijacked aircraft. Hijacking has been neutralized. 3 suspects in custody. Multiple injuries requiring medical attention. Requesting immediate priority handling." A pause. Then, "United 1147, confirm identity of person making this transmission." Devon's eyes moved to the cockpit window, where the clouds stretched endlessly toward the horizon. For 4 years, she'd avoided this moment. 4 years of hiding, of pretending, of trying to be someone she was not. But some things couldn't stay hidden forever. "This is Major Devon Sterling, United States Air Force, retired, service number 773,426. Call sign, Phantom. I have assumed control of this aircraft and am requesting permission to land." The silence on the radio stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, "Phantom. Is that really you?" The voice had changed, no longer a standard air traffic controller, but someone older, more authoritative. "General Marshall," Devon said quietly, "it's been a while. 4 years." The general's voice was thick with emotion. "We thought, never mind what we thought. Can you land that bird?" Devon looked at the instrument panel, then at the clouds ahead, then at her own hands, steady as stone on the controls. "Sir," she said, "I've landed F-16s on carrier decks in the middle of typhoons. I think I can handle a 737. A sound that might have been a laugh came through the radio. "Copy that, Phantom. You are cleared for priority landing. Runway 16 right, emergency services will be waiting." He paused. "And Devon, welcome back." The words hung in the air as she adjusted heading and began the descent sequence. Behind her, First Officer Logan was staring with an expression that combined awe, confusion, and the dawning realization that he'd just witnessed something that would define the rest of his career. "Major Sterling," he finally managed. As in the Major Sterling, the one who, focus on the approach, Lieutenant. She glanced at his insignia. You do still remember how to fly, correct? Yes, ma'am. He snapped to attention automatically, responding to the command presence in her voice. What do you need? Monitor systems. Keep me informed of any anomalies, and when we land, make sure the passengers deplane in an orderly fashion. What about the hijackers? FBI will handle them. Our job is to get everyone on the ground safely. She turned back to the controls, and First Officer Logan watched as her hands moved with the precision of a concert pianist, adjusting throttle, monitoring altitude, making micro-corrections that were almost invisible to the naked eye. He'd been flying commercial aircraft for 12 years. He'd seen good pilots and great pilots. He had never seen anything like this. In the main cabin, the passengers were processing the impossible. One moment they'd been hostages facing the prospect of death or worse at the hands of 3 armed hijackers. The next moment, Iris Wells had emerged from the galley with the announcement that the situation has been resolved and everyone should remain calm. Resolved? By whom? How? The answers came in fragments, passed from row to row in whispered conversations. The flight attendant did it. What flight attendant? The small one, Devon. She took them all down. That's impossible. I saw her. She was like something out of a movie. Who is she? Jackson Hayes sat in row 12, his hands still trembling, but now with something other than fear. Vindication. He'd known something was different about her. He'd sensed the warrior beneath the service worker. But even he hadn't imagined this. Senator Dalton, his jaw still aching from Magnus's punch, was already composing the speech he'd give when the cameras arrived. A story of heroism and survival, with himself naturally positioned as a central figure. But even he knew the real story would center on someone else. In row 8, Grace Bennett was crying, but these were different tears. Relief, gratitude. Her baby was safe. They were all safe. Because a woman who had every reason to stay hidden had chosen to reveal herself for the sake of strangers. And in row 6, little Tyler was pressing his face against the window, watching the clouds drift past, asking his mother a question that seemed to sum up everything. Mama, is the flight attendant lady a superhero? His mother, still processing her own shock, could only manage one word. Yes. But the most incredible part of the story was still to come. The descent took 47 minutes. 47 minutes during which Devon Sterling, Major Devon Sterling, call sign Phantom, the first woman to command an F-16 squadron in active combat, guided the Boeing 737 through weather, traffic, and the chaos of emergency protocols with the same cool precision she'd once used to guide missiles onto enemy targets. First Officer Logan watched in silence, learning more in those 47 minutes than he had in years of simulator training. The way she anticipated turbulence before it hit, the way she adjusted for crosswinds without consulting instruments, the way she communicated with air traffic control in that calm, clipped cadence pilots used when lives depended on every word. Flaps 20, she announced. He complied without question. Gear down. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk. Runway visual, beginning final approach. Through the cockpit window, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport spread beneath them, a grid of concrete and lights that represented safety, civilization, the end of a nightmare. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights flashing red and blue in the afternoon sun. United 1147, you are cleared to land. Air Traffic Control announced. "Emergency services standing by. Welcome home." Devon didn't respond. Her entire focus was on the approach, angle, speed, drift, all the 1,000 tiny variables that separated a good landing from a catastrophic one. The wheels touched down with barely a bump. Reverse thrust engaged. The aircraft slowed, rolling toward the designated gate where a small army of emergency responders waited. Only then did Devon allow herself a single deep breath. It was over. Or rather, one part was over. Another part was just beginning. The aircraft came to a stop at Gate B7. Through the cockpit window, Devon could see the assembled response team. FBI agents in tactical gear, paramedics with stretchers, airport security maintaining a perimeter. Television news helicopters circled overhead, their cameras already broadcasting the scene to millions of viewers. And at the front of the crowd, standing apart from the others, was a figure she'd recognize anywhere. General Marcus Marshall, United States Air Force. 3 stars gleaming on his shoulder boards. 63 years old, silver-haired, with the ramrod posture of a career military officer. He'd been her commanding officer during the Syria campaign, the man who'd pinned silver stars to her chest, who'd written the recommendation for her distinguished flying cross, who'd tried to talk her out of resigning when she'd announced her intention to leave the service. 4 years since she'd seen him last. 4 years since she'd walked away from everything she knew. And now he was waiting on the tarmac, watching her through the cockpit glass with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Ma'am," First Officer Logan's voice broke through her reverie. "The passengers are ready to deplane." "Right." She stood, straightening her torn uniform. "Let's get them home." The cabin door opened to reveal a wall of flashing cameras and shouting voices. FBI agents pushed forward to secure the aircraft. Paramedics rushed toward the injured. The businessman Victor had cut, Captain Anderson on a stretcher, a few passengers suffering from panic attacks and shock. And through it all, 183 people filed off the aircraft in a daze, many of them craning their necks to catch one more glimpse of the woman who had saved their lives. Devon was the last to deplane. She stood in the doorway for a moment, silhouetted against the cabin lights, her uniform torn and bloodied, her dark hair escaping from its regulation bun. Not the picture of military precision she'd once represented, but something else entirely. Something human. General Marshall stepped forward as she descended the stairs. His face was carefully neutral, but his eyes, those sharp gray eyes that had seen 3 wars and 100 crises, were bright with emotion. "Major Sterling," he said formally. "General Marshall." They stood facing each other on the tarmac, surrounded by chaos but occupying their own private bubble of silence. Then Marshall did something that made every camera flash in unison. He snapped to attention, full military bearing, chin up, shoulders back, and raised his right hand in a perfect salute. A 3-star general, saluting a major. No, a 3-star general saluting a hero. Devon's hand came up automatically, returning the salute with the muscle memory of 1,000 repetitions. Her eyes were wet, she realized. When had that happened? "Welcome back, Phantom," Marshall said quietly. "I never left, sir." Her voice caught slightly. "Not really." He lowered his salute, and she lowered hers, and for a moment they were just 2 soldiers who'd seen too much and said too little about it. Then Marshall stepped aside, gesturing toward the crowd of passengers who'd gathered behind the security perimeter. "Your people are waiting." What happened next would bring tears to everyone watching. Devon turned to face them. 183 faces, some crying, some laughing, some still in shock, but all of them looking at her with the same expression, the expression of people who'd been facing death and found instead salvation. Grace Bennett pushed through the crowd, her pregnant belly leading the way. "Miss Sterling, Major Sterling, I don't know how to. You don't have to say anything." Devon's voice was gentle. "Just take care of that baby." "I will." Grace's tears were flowing freely now. "I'm going to name her after you. Devon, is that okay?" Something cracked in Devon's expression, that carefully maintained wall of control. That's too much. Name her after someone you love." "I am." Before Devon could respond, little Tyler had broken free from his mother and thrown his arms around Devon's waist. "You're a superhero," he announced. "A real superhero." Devon looked down at the small boy clinging to her, and for a moment she saw another child, a girl in Kandahar, 7 years old, who'd hidden in a bombed-out building while Devon's squadron provided cover for evacuation helicopters. A girl who'd looked at her the same way when the danger passed. "No," she said softly. "Just someone who was in the right place at the right time. But you saved everyone. I did what needed to be done." She knelt down to his level, looking him directly in the eyes. "And someday, when you're bigger, you'll do the same. When someone needs help and no one else is there, you'll be the one who steps up." Tyler nodded solemnly, as if accepting a sacred mission. Senator Dalton approached, his earlier hostility replaced by something approaching humility. "Major Sterling, I owe you an apology." "No apology necessary, Senator. I treated you like a servant. I demanded you submit to terrorists. You were scared." Devon's voice was matter-of-fact. "Everyone was scared. Fear makes us do things we regret." Dalton stared at her for a long moment. "You weren't scared." "I was terrified, Senator. The difference is I've been terrified before. I've learned what to do with it." But the press was growing more insistent now. Cameras pushed against the security perimeter. Reporters shouted questions that blurred into a wall of noise. "Major Sterling, can you tell us what happened? Is it true you're a decorated combat pilot? Why were you working as a flight attendant? How did you take down 3 armed hijackers?" Devon looked at the cameras, at the microphones, at the hungry eyes of journalists who would turn her story into content. 4 years of anonymity about to end. 4 years of hiding about to become impossible. She'd known this moment would come eventually. She'd prepared for it in 1,000 sleepless nights, but that didn't make it any easier. General Marshall appeared at her side. "You don't have to talk to them." "I know." She took a breath. "But I think I should." She stepped forward and the crowd fell silent. "My name is Devon Sterling," she began. "I am a former major in the United States Air Force. I flew F-16s in Syria and Afghanistan. I received 3 Silver Stars and the Distinguished Flying Cross for actions in combat." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I retired 4 years ago, and I became a flight attendant because I wanted to keep flying without having to hurt anyone." Her voice wavered slightly. "Today that changed. Today I did what I was trained to do, what I hoped I would never have to do again. I am not a hero. I am a person who was given certain skills and who used those skills when innocent people were in danger." A reporter pushed forward. "Major Sterling, there are reports you took down 3 armed men single-handedly in under 10 seconds. Is that true? The specific details will be in the FBI report. What matters is that everyone on that flight is going home to their families tonight. What about the hijackers? What will happen to them? That's for the justice system to decide, not me." Another question from the crowd, one that would change everything. Will you return to the Air Force? Devon hesitated. She could feel General Marshall's eyes on her, feel the weight of the question behind the question. I don't know, she said finally. Right now I just want to get cleaned up and get some rest. The rest can wait. She turned away from the cameras and General Marshall fell into step beside her. That was well handled, he said quietly. I've had practice. The reporters are going to dig. They're going to find out everything. Syria, Afghanistan, the classified operations. I know. Some of those records are still sealed. They won't be for long. Marshall stopped walking, forcing her to stop as well. Devon, what really happened on that plane? Not the version you gave the press, the real version. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the question behind the question. 3 men tried to take over a flight with 183 innocent people on board, she said slowly. They threatened a pregnant woman. They beat a child's mother. They put a gun to a veteran's head. Her voice hardened. They made the mistake of thinking I was helpless, and I showed them that I'm not. Marshall nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He resumed walking, guiding her toward a waiting military vehicle. You know, I tried to find you after you resigned. We all did. Your old squadron mates, the brass at Langley, everyone who remembered what you did during the Damascus raid. I didn't want to be found. I gathered that. He opened the vehicle door for her. Question is, do you want to be found now? Devon paused with one foot inside the vehicle. What do you mean? Marshall's next words would change the course of her life forever. There's something I need to discuss with you, something that can't wait, but not here, not with cameras watching. What kind of something? The kind that explains why 3 highly trained operatives just happened to pick your flight to hijack. The words hit like a physical blow. Devon's hand tightened on the door frame. What are you saying? I'm saying we've been tracking a network, a very dangerous network for the past 18 months. A network that seems to have a particular interest in certain former military personnel. He met her eyes. Personnel like you. The air seemed to freeze around them. Get in the vehicle, Major. We have a lot to discuss. Devon climbed in, and the door closed behind her, sealing her away from the cameras and the questions and the chaos of the public scene. But even in the quiet of the vehicle's interior, she could feel the truth pressing against her. The truth she'd been running from for 4 years. The past was not done with her. It was just getting started. The military vehicle pulled away from the tarmac, leaving behind the flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Inside, the silence was thick enough to cut. Devon sat across from General Marshall, her torn uniform a stark contrast to his immaculate dress blues. The cut on her forearm had been hastily bandaged by a paramedic, but blood was already seeping through the white gauze. She barely noticed. Talk, she said. Marshall reached into his briefcase and produced a manila folder, the old-fashioned kind that suggested its contents were too sensitive for digital storage. He placed it on the seat between them. 18 months ago, we began tracking a series of incidents involving former Special Operations personnel. Assassinations, kidnappings, recruitment attempts, all targeting people with very specific skill sets. What kind of skill sets? Combat pilots, demolitions experts, cyber warfare specialists, the kind of people who could wage a private war if properly organized. Devon's jaw tightened. And you think today's hijacking was connected? I know it was. Marshall opened the folder, revealing a photograph of Magnus, the man who'd thrown her to the cabin floor just hours ago. His real name is Viktor Kovalov. Former Spetsnaz, discharged for excessive brutality. For the past 3 years, he's been working as a contractor for an organization we've been calling the Network. Creative name. We didn't choose it, they did. He pulled out another photograph, one that made Devon's blood run cold, a wolf's head rendered in stark black lines, with a single red eye. "Ghost wolf," she whispered. Marshall nodded slowly. "So you do remember." Remember? How could she forget? That symbol had been burned into her nightmares for 4 years. Ever since the day her wingman's F-16 had exploded in a ball of fire over the Syrian desert, brought down by a surface-to-air missile that shouldn't have existed in that theater of operations. Ghost Wolf was the call sign of the operative who'd supplied that missile. "We thought he died in the subsequent airstrike," Marshall continued. "We were wrong." "How wrong?" "He's alive. He's been building something, an organization, a network of former military assets from a dozen different countries. And 6 months ago, we intercepted communications suggesting he's developed a particular interest in you." The vehicle hit a bump, and Devon steadied herself automatically. Her mind was racing, processing implications faster than Marshall could speak them. "The hijacking wasn't random," she said. "They knew I'd be on that flight. We believe so. They wanted to capture you. Or kill you, or test you, see what you were capable of, see if the stories about Phantom were true." Devon laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Well, now they know." "Yes, now they know." He closed the folder. "Which brings me to my next point. You want me to come back?" It wasn't a question. "The Air Force doesn't need another pilot, Devon. We have plenty of those. What we need is someone who can get inside this network. Someone Ghost Wolf already knows. Someone he's already interested in." "You want me to be bait?" "I want you to be the solution." He leaned forward, his voice intense. 4 years ago, you walked away from the service because you couldn't handle what happened to Lieutenant Jessica Carmichael. I understood that, I respected that, but Jessica didn't die so you could spend the rest of your life serving drinks at 30,000 feet. The name hit like a physical blow. Jessica, her wingman, her best friend. The woman who'd taken a missile meant for Devon's aircraft. Who died screaming over the radio while Devon circled helplessly above, unable to save her. "Don't," Devon said, her voice dangerous. "Don't use her name to manipulate me." "I'm not manipulating you, I'm telling you the truth." Marshall's expression softened slightly. "Ghost Wolf killed Jessica, he's still out there. And now he's building an army. You can walk away again, go back to your apartment, your anonymity, your careful little life, or you can help us stop him." The vehicle slowed, turning into what appeared to be a private airfield on the outskirts of Seattle. Through the tinted windows, Devon could see a military transport plane waiting on the runway. "Where are we going?" "Langley, for a full debrief." Marshall paused. "And to meet some people who have been waiting a very long time to see you again." Devon looked at the plane, then at the folder, then at her own blood-stained hands. 4 years of running, 4 years of hiding. And it had all led here, to a choice she'd been avoiding since the day she watched Jessica's aircraft spiral into the desert below. "One condition," she said finally. "Name it. When we find Ghost Wolf, when we finally corner him, I'm the one who takes him down, not a drone strike, not a SEAL team, me." Marshall studied her face for a long moment. "That's not how we typically operate." "Then change how you operate. Jessica was my wingman. Her death is my responsibility. Her justice is my right." The general was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly he nodded. "Agreed." Devon opened the vehicle door and stepped out onto the tarmac. The wind whipped her hair across her face, carrying the smell of jet fuel and possibility. Behind her, General Marshall emerged from the vehicle, the folder tucked under his arm. "One more thing," he said. She turned. "Welcome back to the war, Phantom." The words echoed in her mind as she walked toward the waiting aircraft, the same words that would define the next chapter of her life, and possibly the last. But that was a story for another day. For now, there was only the plane, the mission, and the ghost of a friend who deserved justice. Devin Sterling climbed the stairs without looking back. 3 weeks later, the world had moved on. The hijacking of Flight AA 1147 had dominated news cycles for approximately 72 hours before being displaced by a political scandal, a celebrity divorce, and the usual parade of human tragedy that constituted modern media. The passengers had returned to their lives, their trauma processed through therapy sessions and family dinners, and the slow, grinding work of recovery. But some stories don't end when the cameras stop rolling. In a conference room at an undisclosed location in Virginia, Devin Sterling sat across from a panel of intelligence officials who'd been grilling her for the better part of 6 hours. Her uniform was new, crisp Air Force blues with the oak leaves of a major on her shoulders, but her eyes carried the same weight they'd carried since Syria. "Let me make sure I understand," said the CIA representative, a thin man with glasses and the perpetually skeptical expression of someone who'd seen too many lies. "You're proposing that we insert you into Ghost Wolf's organization as a defector, a disgraced former pilot looking for revenge against the country that abandoned her. That's correct. And you believe he'll accept you after you just dismantled his hijacking operation and put 3 of his operatives in federal custody. I believe he'll be intrigued." Devin's voice was calm, measured. "Ghost Wolf doesn't think like a normal operative. He's not motivated by money or ideology. He's motivated by excellence, by finding people who are worthy of his attention. And you think you're worthy? I think I just proved I am." The CIA man exchanged glances with his colleagues, representatives from the NSA, DIA, and half a dozen other agencies whose acronyms Devin had stopped trying to memorize. "The risk is substantial," said General Marshall, who'd been observing from the corner of the room. "If Ghost Wolf suspects she's a plant, he'll kill her slowly. And he'll extract every piece of intelligence she has about our operations before he does." "I'm aware of the risks," Devin said. "Are you?" The CIA man leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, this looks less like a strategic operation and more like a personal vendetta." Devin met his gaze without flinching. "Lieutenant Jessica Carmichael was my wingman for 3 years. She saved my life twice. And she died because Ghost Wolf wanted to send a message that no one was safe, that American air superiority was an illusion, that he could reach out and touch anyone he wanted." She paused, letting the words sink in. "So yes, this is personal, but personal doesn't mean irrational. I want Ghost Wolf dead. But more than that, I want his network dismantled. I want every asset he's recruited, every weapon he's stockpiled, every plan he's made. I want all of it exposed and destroyed." "And if we say no?" Devin smiled, a thin, dangerous expression that made several people in the room shift uncomfortably. "Then I'll do it myself, without your resources, without your protection, without your blessing. The only question is whether you want to be part of the solution or an obstacle I have to work around." The silence that followed was profound. Finally, the CIA man sighed and closed his folder. "We'll need to discuss this further." But speaking personally, Major Sterling, I think you might be exactly crazy enough to pull this off. I prefer determined. Same thing in my experience. The meeting adjourned, and Devon found herself walking through pre-war corridors of the facility with General Marshall at her side. That went well, he observed. They're going to say yes. How do you know? Because they don't have any other options. She stopped at a window overlooking the Virginia countryside, watching the sunset over rolling hills that seemed impossibly peaceful. Ghost Wolf has been operating for 18 months without any significant opposition. His network is growing. His capabilities are expanding, and every day we wait, he gets stronger. You sound like you've been studying him. I have. She turned to face the general. For 4 years, I've been studying him. Every intelligence report, every after-action analysis, every scrap of information I could find. I told myself it was just curiosity, just trying to understand what happened to Jessica. But I think deep down I always knew this day would come. Marshall nodded slowly. The file on Ghost Wolf is extensive, but there's something you should know, something that wasn't in the official reports. What? The general hesitated, as if weighing whether to continue. 3 months before Jessica was killed, we received intelligence suggesting Ghost Wolf had a mole inside our operations. Someone feeding him information about flight schedules, patrol routes, pilot assignments. Devon's blood went cold. You're saying someone told him where to find us? I'm saying it's possible. We never confirmed the intelligence, and after Jessica's death, the investigation was complicated. Complicated how? The lead investigator was killed in a car accident. The backup files were corrupted. Key witnesses were reassigned to classified operations. Marshall's voice was heavy. At the time, we attributed it to bad luck. Now I'm not so sure. The implications were staggering. If Ghost Wolf had a mole, if someone inside the American military had been feeding him information, then Jessica's death wasn't just an act of war. It was a betrayal. Who knew about our flight plan that day? Devon asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A lot of people. Too many to narrow down. Marshall put a hand on her shoulder. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you're walking into. Ghost Wolf isn't just a terrorist or a mercenary. He's a chess player, and he's been setting up pieces on this board for years. Then it's time someone knocked them down. That's the plan. The general withdrew his hand. Get some rest, Major. Tomorrow we start preparing for your insertion. It's going to be a long road. Devon nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. To the mission, to the danger, to the ghost of a friend who deserved justice. And somewhere in a facility she would never see, a man with cold eyes reviewed a report about the events of Flight AA 1147. Ghost Wolf smiled. The pieces were moving exactly as he'd planned. 1 month later, 1 month after that, Devon Sterling officially ceased to exist. The cover story was elegant in its simplicity. A decorated combat pilot, traumatized by her experiences in Syria, had suffered a mental breakdown following her involvement in the hijacking incident. She'd been discharged from the Air Force under less than honorable conditions. Her security clearance revoked. Her reputation destroyed by carefully planted rumors of instability and misconduct. The reality was more complex. Devon spent 3 weeks in an isolated facility undergoing the most intensive training of her career. Close quarters combat refreshers, advanced interrogation resistance. the subtle art of building a cover identity that could withstand scrutiny from professionals who specialized in detecting lies. And then, one gray morning in October, she boarded a commercial flight to Prague, the first step in a journey that would take her deep into the shadow world where Ghost Wolf operated. But that, as they say, is another story. What matters now is what happened in the weeks after the hijacking, the ripples that spread outward from that single act of courage, touching lives in ways Devon Sterling would never fully know. In Seattle, Grace Bennett gave birth to a healthy baby girl on November 15th. She named her Devon, despite the Major's objections. And every year on the anniversary of the hijacking, she sent a letter to an address that always seemed to forward correctly, no matter how many times it changed. The letters were never answered, but they were always read. In Montana, Senator Richard Dalton introduced the Sterling Aviation Security Act, which provided funding for enhanced training programs for flight crews. The bill passed with bipartisan support. And Dalton never mentioned his own behavior during the hijacking, the demands, the condescension, the moment when he'd urged compliance with terrorists. Some lessons were learned in silence. In a suburb of Dallas, 8-year-old Tyler Parker started taking martial arts classes. His mother didn't understand the sudden interest, but she supported it anyway, sensing that something had changed in her son during those terrifying hours at 35,000 feet. When asked why he wanted to learn to fight, Tyler always gave the same answer: "So I can help people like the superhero lady." First Officer Logan, now Captain Logan, returned to flying within 2 months of the incident. His first flight was a red-eye from Seattle to Dallas, and he spent most of it thinking about the woman who'd sat in the captain's seat beside him, guiding an aircraft through crisis with hands that never trembled. He'd submitted a recommendation for her to receive the Distinguished Service Medal. The recommendation had been acknowledged but never acted upon, lost, presumably in the same bureaucratic void that had swallowed Devon Sterling's official existence. But Captain Logan knew the truth, and every time he landed an aircraft, he did so with a silent acknowledgement of the woman who'd reminded him what courage looked like. Jackson Hayes, the retired Air Force sergeant who'd been the first to suspect Devon's true identity, wrote a blog post about his experience. It went viral within hours, accumulating millions of views and thousands of comments from people who wanted to know more about the mysterious Major Sterling. He never revealed the details of his conversation with her, the brief exchange they'd shared while waiting for the FBI to process the scene. When he'd asked her why she'd hidden her identity for so long, her answer had stayed with him. "Because I wanted to be someone who helped people without hurting anyone. I thought I could leave the violence behind." "And now?" he'd asked. She'd looked at him with those gray eyes, ancient eyes, he thought, eyes that had seen too much, and smiled sadly. "Now I know that some violence is necessary, the violence that protects the innocent from those who would destroy them, the violence that stands between evil and its victims." She'd paused. "I spent 4 years running from that truth. I can't run anymore." Jackson had nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. He'd served 18 years in the military. He knew the weight of duty, the burden of capability, the impossible choice between peace and purpose. "Will I see you again?" he'd asked. "Probably not." She'd offered her hand, and he'd shaken it, the hand of a warrior, scarred and calloused and stronger than it looked. But if you ever fly again and something goes wrong, look for the flight attendant who doesn't panic. You never know who might be watching over you." Then she was gone, swept away by FBI agents and military officials, and the machinery of a world most people never saw. Jackson Hayes went home to his wife and his grandchildren and his quiet life in Texas. He never told anyone about that conversation. But sometimes, on sleepless nights, he would step outside and look up at the stars, at the aircraft lights blinking across the darkness, and wonder where she was now, what she was doing, and whether the world would ever know the true cost of the protection she provided. The answer to that question came 6 months later, in a classified briefing that would never be declassified. Operation Phantom Strike, as it came to be known, resulted in the complete dismantling of Ghost Wolf's network. 17 cells across 12 countries were neutralized. Over 200 operatives were killed or captured. Billions of dollars in illicit assets were seized. And Ghost Wolf himself, the man who'd killed Jessica Carmichael, who'd built an army in the shadows, who'd believed himself untouchable, was found in a bunker in eastern Ukraine with a single bullet hole in his forehead and a note pinned to his chest. The note contained 2 words, for JESSICA. The identity of the operative who'd eliminated Ghost Wolf was never officially confirmed. But those who knew, the small circle of intelligence professionals who'd shepherded the operation from its inception, understood that justice had finally been served. Major Devon Sterling, call sign Phantom, had kept her promise. The details of what happened in that bunker remained classified. What was known was that Devon had infiltrated Ghost Wolf's inner circle over the course of 5 months, building trust through a series of increasingly dangerous operations. She'd identified the mole who'd betrayed Jessica's flight plan, a mid-level intelligence analyst who'd been compromised years earlier. She'd mapped the entire network, from its funding sources to its weapons caches to its long-term strategic objectives. And when the moment came, when she finally stood face to face with the man who'd haunted her nightmares for 5 years, she'd done what she was trained to do, what she had to do. The exfiltration was clean. Within 72 hours of Ghost Wolf's elimination, Devon was back on American soil, undergoing debriefing at the same Virginia facility where her mission had begun. General Marshall was waiting for her. "It's done," she said simply. "I know." He studied her face, looking for signs of trauma or regret. He found neither, only a profound exhaustion that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than physical fatigue. "How do you feel?" Devon considered the question. "I thought I'd feel different, relieved maybe, or satisfied." She shook her head slowly. "I just feel tired. That's normal. What you did, what you've been doing for the past 6 months, it takes a toll." "I know." She walked to the window, looking out at the same Virginia countryside she'd contemplated months ago. The seasons had changed. The hills were covered in snow now, pristine and peaceful. "What happens next?" "That's up to you." Marshall joined her at the window. "You've more than earned a retirement, a real one this time, a cabin somewhere quiet, a life without missions or covers or the weight of other people's lives on your shoulders." "That sounds nice." She smiled, a real smile this time, touched with something that might have been hope. "But I don't think I'm built for quiet, not anymore." "I was hoping you'd say that." The general reached into his jacket and produced a folder. A new folder with a new mission, a new challenge. There's a situation developing in the South China Sea. Nothing urgent yet, but we could use someone with your particular skill set." Devon took the folder and opened it, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. "This is a training position." "It is." "We're developing a new program, preparing the next generation of operatives for the kind of asymmetric threats that people like Ghost Wolf represent. We need instructors who understand what it means to operate in the gray zones, people who can teach not just skills but wisdom. And you think I'm qualified for that? I think you're the only person qualified for that." Marshall's voice was serious. "You've walked the path, Devon. You've seen what happens when good people break under pressure and what happens when they don't. You know the cost of the work we do and the cost of not doing it." She closed the folder and held it against her chest, feeling the weight of possibility. "Can I think about it? Take all the time you need." He checked his watch. "But not too much time. The world isn't getting any safer." He left her alone at the window, staring out at the snow-covered hills. Devon Sterling, Major, Pilot, Operative, Survivor, thought about the choices that had led her here. The decision to join the Air Force at 18 against her father's wishes. The decision to volunteer for combat operations when she could have stayed safe at a training command. The decision to walk away after Jessica's death. And the decision to come back when innocent lives were threatened. Every choice had led to this moment, this window, this opportunity. She thought about Jessica, whose face she could still see clearly after all these years. Jessica, who'd believed in duty and honor and the idea that some things were worth fighting for. Jessica, who'd died protecting her. "I'm still here," Devon whispered to the ghost of her friend. "I'm still fighting." The snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in white. And somewhere in a training facility that didn't officially exist, a new class of operatives waited to learn the lessons that only experience could teach. Devon Sterling turned away from the window, folder in hand. The war was over. But the work was just beginning. 3 months later, in a nondescript building at a classified location, Devon stood before her first class of students. They were young, most of them barely older than she'd been when she first climbed into an F-16 cockpit. Fresh-faced and eager, with the confidence of people who'd never truly been tested. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and respect, having heard the rumors about the legendary Phantom but not quite believing them. She let them look. Then she began to speak. "You're here because someone thinks you have potential. Maybe you were top of your class at Annapolis or West Point. Maybe you have a gift for languages or combat or strategic thinking. Maybe you've already proven yourself in ways that impress the people who select candidates for this program." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "None of that matters." The students shifted uncomfortably. "What matters is what happens next. The skills you'll learn here, the tradecraft, the combat techniques, the psychological tools, those are just mechanics. Anyone can learn mechanics." She stepped closer to the front row. "What can't be taught is the quality that separates operators who survive from operators who don't." A hand went up. "What quality is that, ma'am?" Devon smiled. "The willingness to sacrifice everything, your comfort, your safety, your identity, your life, for something larger than yourself." She turned to the window where the sun was setting over the hills. "I spent 4 years running from that truth. I told myself I could be normal, that I could leave the fight to others." She faced them again. "I was wrong. Some of us are built for this work. Some of us are called to stand between innocent people and the darkness that threatens them." And if you're sitting in this room, it's because someone believes you might be one of those people. She walked to the lectern and opened a folder. Today we begin. By the end of this program, most of you will wash out. That's not a prediction, it's a statistical certainty. The standards we maintain are the highest in the world, and they exist for a reason. What reason? Another student asked. Devon looked at him, really looked, the way she'd learned to assess threats and opportunities in a single glance. Because when you fail in this work, people die. Good people, innocent people, people who trusted you to protect them. Her voice hardened. I've held friends as they died. I've attended funerals for operators who made one mistake, just one, and paid for it with everything they had. This program is designed to ensure that when you face those moments, and you will face them, you're ready. The room was silent. Any questions? No hands went up. Good, then let's begin. She opened the folder and started the first lesson, passing on the knowledge that had been paid for in blood and sacrifice and sleepless nights. Outside, the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. And somewhere in the hearts of young operatives who would one day carry the torch, a flame was kindled. The flame of duty, the flame of sacrifice. The flame that Devon Sterling had nearly let die but had chosen in the end to keep burning. For Jessica. For the passengers of Flight AA 1147. For everyone who would never know the names of those who protected them. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the hijacking, a small package arrived at Grace Bennett's home in Seattle. Inside was a hand-carved wooden phoenix, exquisitely detailed, with a note that contained only 4 words, "Fly high, little one." There was no return address, no signature, nothing to indicate where it had come from or who had sent it. But Grace knew. She placed the carving on the shelf above her daughter's crib, where baby Devon slept peacefully, unaware of the guardian angel who watched over her from afar. And somewhere in the world, perhaps in a training facility, perhaps on a mission, perhaps simply walking through an airport with the anonymity of a civilian, Major Devon Sterling continued her work, protecting, teaching, fighting, living, because some flames once kindled never truly go out. They just find new fuel, new purpose, new lives to illuminate, or perhaps, more accurately, to be continued. Because in the world of shadows where warriors operate, endings are merely beginnings in disguise. And Phantom's story was far from over. This story isn't just about a flight attendant who turned out to be a decorated combat pilot. It's about the quiet warriors among us, the people who carry extraordinary capabilities behind ordinary faces, who choose service over recognition, and who step forward when others step back. Devon Sterling spent 4 years hiding from her past, believing she could outrun the person she was trained to become. But when 183 innocent lives hung in the balance, she discovered a truth that applies to all of us. We cannot escape who we truly are. Our gifts, our training, our experiences, they exist for a reason. And sometimes that reason doesn't reveal itself until the moment we're needed most. The lesson here is profound yet simple. Never underestimate anyone based on appearance. The janitor might be a veteran. The server might be a scholar. The quiet person in the corner might be the one who saves your life. Treat everyone with respect because you never know whose story you're walking into. More importantly, this story reminds us that hiding our light doesn't protect us. It only delays the inevitable moment when we must shine. If this story moved you, remember, heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they push beverage carts. Up next, you've got 2 more incredible stories waiting on your screen. If this one hit you, tap to watch the next, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Oh, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where you're watching from.